Thanks for joining us. Khalil, why don't you sort of set the scene for us? Why is it so important to build models, for local languages? Why can't we just all take a model that's been built by OpenAI or Anthropic and use that? And can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do at Mesolika?
Okay, good evening. So the question is why? Ultimately, it's about AI sovereignty. So after about almost 2 years training LLMs ourselves, this is the top of the mind, the USP that we put ourselves in as a local startup. So what we've done since December 2023 is to train our flagship model called MALAM, Malaysia Large Language Model. And as a startup, it is an audacious goal to be able to do this. So that's the motivation.
What's wrong with the existing models? What do you find sort of lacking? If you went to OpenAI and you asked it to do something in Bahasa Malay, how would it do compared to what you're trying to build?
Okay, so if we want to wait for the big boys to capture all the languages, sub-languages, and ethnic languages in Malaysia alone, it will take a long time. There will be a gap. So we took upon ourselves to begin and continue for the nation.
Great.
So this is the big goal for us.
Khalil, you've been looking at this issue for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit, what motivates you to look at this specifically? And then, with the context of India, a country with so many different languages, and where people often use quite a mixture of different languages and some English, how do you go about addressing that problem? Getting the data and trying to build a model that can kind of code switch between these languages.
Yeah, so I've been working on this for a long time because I really do think that language should not be a barrier to the use of technology. It shouldn't be the case that because I speak language X instead of language Y, therefore I cannot use a technology that I want to use to better my life or work in general. So I think in India the problem is magnified because we do have 22 official languages and hundreds of other languages and thousands of dialects. So it does become a problem. We do have a problem of data paucity, but even for languages where data is available, such as Hindi or Tamil or Bangla, if you see the representation of training models in the large language models that are available to us right now, these languages form a very tiny sliver of the data that's used for training. Now, I like to say that even when I say, oh, they don't work in our language or our culture, people will come back with anecdotes and say, but I did this and it worked perfectly fine, and I did that and it worked perfectly fine. And that's not a very rigorous way of evaluating something. And I like to say that, a large language model, a generic large language model, which is trained in mainly English and other Western languages, is a bit like a Fulbright scholar who is interested in Asia as their area of study. So they know a lot about the thing, but they miss, the culture. It's an outsider's gaze into the culture of the country. And that, for many reasons, does not work when you're trying to kind of have AI as part of various workflows, et cetera.
Great. Kasimit, do we have the right benchmarks for sort of assessing, how these models are going to work, even in a local language? And how do you go about building those kind of evaluation sets?
Well, the easy answer to that, Jeremy, is no.
Right.
Let's just start there. I mean, the work is really sort of like when you talk about a low resource language, which is what we're talking about on stage, it's low resource not just because we don't have the compute or the data, it's everything, right? And so for instance, for our project Typhoon, we really needed to start with benchmarks, right? We really
why don't you tell everyone what Typhoon is, so if they're not familiar with it?
So Typhoon is the project I look after out of SCB 10X, which is the investment and innovation arm of Siam Commercial Bank. And I'm under the R&D function, and we basically are developing open source AI language technologies that are specifically focused on Thai. And so our first release was about 1.5 years ago. We were able to outperform GPT 3.5 in Thai. That actually says more about how poorly GPT 3.5 was performing in Thai more than our work. Our work is amazing. Our researchers are amazing, but it's limited. But we really had to start with evaluations. And as part of our work around the research, we continue to push evaluations. For instance, I think we are one of the first languages that have a benchmark that's a non-English on Stanford's benchmarking site, right? So this is the kind of sort of foundational work you need to do to actually get this kind of language support, which is sort of baked in or taken for granted in English.
Right. I know a problem with a lot of low resource languages is that, it is what it says. There's not enough data out there that in a digital form to train a model sometimes. Cosmo, what are some of the sort of tricks you're using to kind of bootstrap the amount of data that you have available so you can get a good model built?
Boy, I think what I'll say is there are no tricks. Probably Khalil and Kalika would agree with me. For us, I think, we just had to do the work, right? And we were limited in the amount of data, but there was another dimension that we focused on in that very first model that did well for us, which was quality of data, right? And so we went to the same data sources that a large frontier lab would go to, like Common Crawl, right, which is a really open, large data set. And we basically took the Thai and we, by hand, went through, not line by line, but source by source, and said, this is a high quality Thai data source or not, rather than taking the whole thing. And then we adjusted the data mix for that. But that's work that a native speaker needs to do, right? And that's work that I'm sure why we on stage work on this kind of work, because we can provide that kind of perspective. But there are no tricks here. It's like you really have to do the work. We're doing data collection right now for dialects of Thai, which have no digital data, right, or very limited digital data. I know in India there's AI for Bharat, which is like a real big model for us on how to do data collection. They've been doing it for 2 years. But it really is just effort, it's almost brute force.
Yeah, Kalika, how for you guys? What are there things you've tried? How have you managed to collect the data?
So, for the last 2 decades, I've always been asked questions which ultimately mean how can we shortcut the data collection? How can we not spend on getting data? And like you said, there's no way. You have to spend on creating the data for what you want to do. But the things that, there are 2 differences that have happened, since Gen AI came into the scene. One is that the Indian government is investing a lot in data procurement as well as creation. So like AI for Bharat, a lot of it is funded by the Indian government. A lot of commercial entities, big tech companies are also supporting data collection. What we in Microsoft Research India have been focusing on is small language models. So we are kind of looking at how we can create SLMs, smaller language models, for specific languages and even for specific domains, so for which you need very high quality, small amount of data. We are also exploring synthetic data generation. So we are actually giving some seed data and using LLMs to create synthetic data and actually use that data for evaluation or for training, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Right, interesting. How about for you, Khalil? What are you seeing in Malaysia, and how are you getting the data you need?
Okay, so some of the answers has been right. So there's no tricks. It's just we follow how the frontier labs does it, right? Scour the web, scrape all the local website, a good mixture. That means the formal and informal, from forums, from social media, government websites, government PDF. That's the first part. So for us, it took us 4 months to scrape, 4 months to prep, and 10 days to train. So that's the first version. So that's to do the full training.
Right.
Okay? Subsequently, the next version is not really training from scratch already. We just do SFT, supervised fine-tuning on existing models. And a good of this year, again, is synthetic. How we're able to capture all the 16 dialects in Malaysia is through synthetic. 405 Llama was a big help to bootstrap, so to speak. While that is going on, looking at the legality of scraping web data under this fair use, it is an issue. Legal cases are it's happening in the States, right? And we've seen local data owners in Malaysia keeping an eye on what we do. Right. Because when we prepare the data, we eventually open source as well on our site on Hugging Face. So these data owners will come to our Hugging Face and peruse and just send a request, okay, please remove this set.
Right.
So that's what we've seen. So now the challenge for us is to work with private data set owners.
Right.
To improve on the quality of data sets.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll just mention one thing I've heard from somebody else who's worked on this problem for a very low resource African language. They said they actually had to first build a speech-to-text model, and then they could give it to people, even in villages that were sort of illiterate, get them to talk to their, to this device or the smartphone, and that was a good way to gather more data than existed. I don't know if you're seeing other innovations like that around the world, Kalika, but I'm curious about that. That struck me as, oh yeah, that makes sense. That's a clever way to kind of maybe gather more data, is to get a product out in the market, get people using it through speaking, but use that speech-to-text to then generate much more text data in that local language.
Yeah, the only thing is that, collecting enough speech data is another problem.
Another problem, right?
Right? And actually for countries like India and a lot of global majority countries or global south, however you might want to address them, voice first is very much how we interact with technology. So we actually need that ASR system to work really well. But yeah, once you have the ASR system, then you'll be able to get a lot of conversational speech transcribed.
So how we tackle right now for 2025, the focus is on the audio part of the LLM, right? So coming back to my point on the private data set, February this year, we signed a MOU with the national broadcaster in Malaysia. So this is specifically with radio, not the TV, because for TV, it's just the national language. But for the radio, it is at the state level.
Right.
So each state will have their own radio in that particular dialect. So we would get high quality dialect audio from the state level. So that's how we are trying to overcome the speech ASR and TTS for voice cloning.
Right.
Yeah.
Kasim, I wanted to ask about the goal here sort of is to, you want a model that's going to work well for people in local language. Do you, again, this maybe goes back to benchmarking, do you really look and say, okay, the model's now really good at Thai on particular sets of tasks that we really care about, and then, but does it mean maybe it won't be as good as a model built by a hyperscaler or one of the big tech companies on something like coding or math? Because they're building these models like sort of to do everything, and they're kind of evaluating them as of human performance across so many metrics. But of course, they may fall down when it comes to actually translating from English to Thai or trying to do speech to text in Thai. What do you look at, and is it okay, do you think, if you build a model that's very good at certain tasks in Thai language, but maybe not good at math or something?
Yeah, there's no way we're going to compete with the large frontier labs, right? We don't have the resources.
Right.
But we look at it as from a multi-model perspective, right? We're looking for our models to collaborate with the bigger models. We don't need to be better at physics than GPT 4.0, right? We do want to be maybe better at food or describing food in Thai or understanding the legal documents in Thai, right? So we start from open source based models that are trained by either the Chinese or Americans, and then we train on top of that. And we do look for certain improvements in very specific tasks that we think we can provide value to. But we're not necessarily looking, we will lose some performance, right? And it's just the natural trade-off. We're trying to get some more performance here, and we'll lose some there.
Right.
But that is somewhat by design.
Yeah.
I think the hardest thing for us when we think about this from a localization standpoint is actually picking the task. Right. Finding the task that we can do well on without an incredible amount of effort that has sort of value in the community or in the country or for usage.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned food as one area. Are there others that you kind of look at and say, we really want to do particularly well in this category? What would some of those be?
The things that we're looking at right now are obviously I work for a financial institution, so we're looking at finance, right? And sort of baked into that are sort of some legal structures.
Right.
And we're working with Siddharth Hospital, which is one of the big research hospitals in Thailand, to do a medical one, right? Where we want to be able to maybe find ways to deploy that kind of technology to end users, like the citizens or the people of Thailand, to maybe get medical help. And that requires some sort of language adaptation around there. Beyond that, I mean that's like I said, it's
Yeah.
ultimately product work, right?
Right.
We need to find where we can sort of add the most value.
Yeah. So many of the models now are multimodal, and that brings up a whole other set of issues about where, how do you perform well in local context? What are you seeing in that regard? What's sort of Microsoft working on there?
So so especially kind of moving away from a kind of a Western stereotype in multimodal to more regional representations, it's actually not very robust. We've been working on something we call Kahani, which means story in Hindi, where we're trying to kind of generate images, with local context. And it's actually really difficult, because in the beginning it would just give us a Disney princess,
right,
but put it in on a sand beach with palm trees, and that was like, an Indian princess, and just getting consistency over frames, etc. That's an issue. On the multimodal side, like, I think earlier people were discussing agriculture, getting those pictures. We've been working on agri-multimodal model as well, how do you get the relevant contextual pictures. But I have to, if I may, I want to kind of say something about
sure,
what Seema said, and that is like, we think that they're just these tasks that a particular language or a particular community will need, and ChatGPT can do math, and that's fine, and we don't need, and we'll just put a translation model in front of it. But this is an example, a real world example that I kind of quote everywhere to show why translation will not work and why you need a base model to actually work across languages. Now this is an primary school mathematic problem, which is John and Mary have a key lime pie, which they need to divide into 5 parts. Now if you can use the best translator in the world, and what it will do is just say John and Mary have a key lime pie, which they need to divide into 5 parts in that particular language. Now the issue here is that in a country like India, I mean, most people don't know what a pie is, forget key lime pie.
Right.
Right? So, and the whole problem is, the crux of the problem is that there's a round object that needs to be divided. Now, if you do not get that across, then it doesn't work.
Right.
The problem doesn't work. So that's why I think, I really believe that it has to work across in all tasks in all possible ways.
Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to come to the audience for questions in just a moment, so please think of your questions and I'll come to you. Khalil, I wanted to ask you about the opportunities for regional collaboration. I mean, obviously this is a problem being faced by a lot of countries across the region where you have local languages. Is there opportunities here for collaboration, do you think, across ASEAN?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for the case of Mesotica, because we open source the data set, open weights models, and the codes, we actually have R&D MOU with AI Singapore.
Right.
So that's one form of collaboration. Beyond that is working too closely with other national language startups, right? So this is the conversation that we are having with NVIDIA HQ. We are assigned to a unit there that focuses on startups that does localized LLM.
Right.
So from that collaboration, we can see this materialize, because in a way, every local startup wants to go regional, right? So there's the incentive might not be aligned just quite in terms of the time period. Right. Some are faster, some are slower. Like us, we're taking our time because we are still bootstrapping. We are spending a lot of time engaging with policymakers and stakeholders, and just to ensure that we continue to be technically competent on what's coming up.
Right.
That's our focus. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Great. Let's go to the audience for questions. Who's got a question? If I don't see any, I'll carry on, but let's just see if anyone has any first. Don't see any hands up yet, so I'm going to carry on. I want to ask a little bit about you know, the sensitivity of when you go out and gather data, we talked a little bit about this, Kalika. If you're trying to get a bigger data set, maybe there are local language resources, but there's been all kinds of issues raised, you know, even in the context of the models that have been built so far about, yeah, do you have rights to that data? And then there, of course, in certain contexts, also people are very particular about certain stories that may be unique to their culture or community. And if you're using those and putting them into a model, can you talk a little bit about some of the sensitivities around that and how at Microsoft you tried to address that or think about that issue?
Yeah, so, you know, when you go out on the field and you know, kind of, I really believe that the language community has to be involved in the kind of data you're building. But when you go out into the community, whichever community, and try to get data, the things that I've learned over time is that, you know, be very transparent about what you're trying to do. Right? We've had issues where we've gone and actually explained that we're using this data for ASR, and we try to explain to the person what ASR is by using example of the phone thing. And in the end, we realized after we'd done the job that the person had actually thought that their voice is going to be the voice of the agent.
Oh, right.
Right? So, so you have to be really clear. The other thing is that there is a tendency for researchers and technologists to kind of helicopter in, extract what they need and helicopter out. And I think like having some kind of community involvement in what happens with the technology, showing them early benefits of the technology and engaging them in the entire process really helps. So those are the kind of things that we kind of work very closely. And then you have to be sensitive about the cultural norms of that community, right? There are things that you would not ask. We had this experience of going to the northeast of India, working with the community, where you know, they really weren't very keen to talk about their cultural, almost shamanic practices, right? Those stories they were not interested in sharing.
Right.
They wouldn't tell you anything about a tiger because in their culture, tiger was referred to as big brother. You know, that you don't take the name of the tiger as tiger.
Right.
So those are the things that you have to, it's very good to have somebody who understands this cultural sensitivity and the landscape around it with you when you go data collecting.
Wow, that's fascinating. Are you finding the same thing, Khalil, when in Malaysia there's similar sort of sensitivities you have to dance around or work around?
Conversations, yes, but we haven't seen any actual requests to actually implement, right? But we've gone ahead to prepare the components that is needed, if ever that is required to be implemented. So for in case point, the alignment or guardrails, right? So instead of aligning our model is open source and is minimally aligned. So what we had to do, we just train a traditional classifier model as a site that we can continue to improve efficiently based on the requirements. But we know, because there is no regulation yet to employ unless requested, the first three main things that we have to, I would say, guardrails are the 3R in Malaysia, right? Race, religion, and royalty. So that will be the immediate thing if we were to deploy in the public sector. And we know that, but we already have it there. We already have a paper. It's just a matter of getting the stakeholders to provide the data set to us.
Right.
Yes. So we're just ready.
Right, interesting.
Yeah.
Customer in Thailand, obviously there are also some sensitivities around, you know, what you can say. There are certain subjects that are very sensitive. How have you tried to create guardrails for the model you're building?
That's more on the inference side, and along with the model, the way we've done it is we also released a safety model.
Okay, right.
So that's, the other my colleagues get it. It's difficult, right? And that's another way that you look at it, where it's sort of a regional or a region sensitivity, a region complexity that you need to work around.
Yeah. Right. Kalika, what have you found sort of in building these models? What's been the most difficult thing for you? And then maybe what's been a surprise on the sort of in a positive way? What's maybe surprised you? Has it been easier than you thought it might be?
So one thing that definitely is different in India overall is that India is very tech positive. So most people are extremely happy to help you out. And if you say that you're building something for the language, they're even more enthusiastic about it. So that's the thing that we don't have to usually worry about, that people are going to say, no, we don't want to do this, et cetera, et cetera. On the whole, India is very tech positive. That's the positive side. The negative side is that safety is extremely difficult. It's really difficult to talk about safety and bias in regional languages, especially because bias does not translate well, right? So if you think something is biased or something is harmful and it's expressed in English, just translating it into another language is not going to solve the problem, because it would be, even if it was the same kind of bias, it would be very different. The other thing is that in a lot of societies, because of, and this is maybe something that we haven't thought so much, or I'm not aware of in the Western world, is that when there are inequities, right, even the notion of bias kind of varies quite a lot. So if I was to say that women should stay at home and only look after their family and children, I hope that everyone here will think that it is a biased sentence. But you know, in India, if I was to just step out of my city, you know, a lot of women would think that's a perfectly normal thing. So having to work on a safety model under those circumstances, it's really difficult.
Right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Khalil, what have you found working in Malaysia? Are there things that have surprised you sort of on the upside that were easier to do than you thought they would be? And maybe what are some of the things you found really difficult?
I think from deployment standpoint, I think the problem is the same for any other LLM project. Is about, yes, you can do a lot of POCs, right? In the early days, we were happy to do free POCs. And after that, we learned our lesson, and that getting into production, especially for the enterprise, it's a long journey, right? So we have to scale it back and find a more better way to spend the time. Okay, and then not one thing that I was so comfortable, because we are very early, and in Malaysia, that there are only 3 players that publicly say that they are training. One is a conglomerate, one is the listed company, and the other one is a startup called Misorotica, right? So we have these 3 players that we are keeping tabs on, kind of like a frenemy, I would say, like we exchange notes, and we have our own lane that we stick on. So for us, I enjoy the engagement with the stakeholders, right? We were able to have a sit down early with the minister to explain what we do, so that give us an advantage. Then from there, we can pick and choose on the POCs that we want to do to showcase our capabilities. So in previous one will be with the national broadcaster I shared earlier. Prior to that is together with the National AI Office. And I think the upcoming one that we're doing right now is for the super app.
Right.
So that's going to be very, very interesting. But ultimately, for me, is just to get the chatbot right.
Right.
After you get the chatbot right, you can talk all the use cases that you want.
Interesting.
That's how I feel. Yes.
Kasma, I want to ask about sort of talent. You know, another thing is that you're a smaller country. There's less AI talent to go around. There's a very, obviously in this case, for financial use case of a local language model, there's a good business case why to build it. But are you finding you're able to get enough talent that you need to build these kind of models?
It's challenging. It's challenging to find. I mean, the other thing is just, it comes back to resources, right? It's all the big companies are hoovering up global AI talent, right? And so for us, at least for my project, there's a big part of it that we sell the mission, right? We're doing a public good. It's open source work. You get to do it in your mother tongue,
right?
But yeah, there's again no easy answer to that. On the other side of that is that there's a lot of interest. And so I know in Thailand, there are programs now to try to train new talent to become AI engineers. Right. There's a lot of effort to try to grow talent within the country, and I'm sure that's happening in other places as well.
Great. Fantastic. We're out of time, but thank you very much for listening, and thank you to my fantastic panel. It's been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you.